we're only going to keep the audio. And
so it's only audio?
Yeah, it's only audio. Although you look great, so kudos to you. So I'll do an introduction, and then we'll go straight into the questions. Let's see if I can put on my serene voice. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Today, we have the privilege of interviewing a magnate of data analysis, a champion of ethical consulting, and a leader of polling analysis, Mr. Nik Nanos of Nanos Research. Mr. Nanos is a certified management consultant, chairman of Nanos Research Group of Companies, a master of business administration, former Speaker of the House of Commons of Canada, a pioneer of publicly released nightly election tracking results, a regular contributor to more news and media outlets than we can count, the pollster of record for the Globe and Mail and CTV News, and he has a regular weekly segment called Nanos on Numbers, which looks at the latest political, social, and business trends. Mr. Nanos is also a published author with several books in circulation and an accomplished philanthropist and volunteer with great organizations such as Carleton University as their chair of the Board of Governors, and the Canadian Journalist for Free Expression, as well as the Rideau Club of Canada. So welcome, Nik. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Yes. And boy, that was a long introduction. Do we still have time to do a podcast, or is all the time used up? And also, all those things are true, but I'm not a former Speaker of the House of Commons because I'm not an elected official, but maybe someday, who knows?
Oh, touche. Well, it certainly makes me reflect on what I've achieved in my life going over all that, but it gives me something to aim for. So,
well, I know there's no picture, but I look very old and I have lots of gray hair, but you're like a young person. I see you there like a full head of hair plus, not a lot of gray. So there's lots of runway. There's lots of runway.
I'll take the compliment, although half of the hair on my head was transplanted. So,
okay. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I was happy bald, but someone offered it to me, so I couldn't say no. So again, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us on our inaugural podcast episode. How's the COVID pandemic affected your daily routine and your business?
Well, for the first couple of months, it was completely disruptive. Like everyone else, I stayed home. We were told to stay home. I stayed home, and have my wife is a federal civil servant. She was working full time from home, and she still is. So the disruption has continued for her. I had a couple of boys at home, so they're trying to go to school. And for the first 2 months, it was completely disruptive. I was fortunate. So the nice thing about doing research is I get to talk and meet to people that are smarter than me in a number of areas. And one of my friends used to be the chief scientist at Health Canada. If you think I've got a cool title, that's an even cooler title. And I remember asking him about the pandemic in February, and he basically told me everything that eventually happened. He said, the government is not prepared. We won't have vaccinations for at least a year. The disruption will be, at that time, he said, at least 6 to 10 months minimum. And that would be in the ideal situation. And as a result, I came back to the office. He was in Calgary. I came back to the office and I said, the pandemic's coming. Let's make sure our technology is ready. Let's make sure, get ready for telework. And everybody thought I was nuts. And, but, luckily we were ahead of the game, but it was significantly disruptive for me personally at the beginning. And then afterwards, because the office was empty, and I guess maybe this is my frugal penny pinching ways, we had an empty office. So I went into the office by myself. We have good bandwidth, and I ended up just going into the office by myself, even though the office was closed. We weren't taking any visitors, and no staff were coming in. So it's kind of like a zombie apocalypse moment where you're going into work and there's tumbleweeds downtown Ottawa because not very many people are going to work. And basically, so I've been at my desk and ironically wearing a tie since after about 60 days from the pandemic all the way through. So it's been a significant disruption in terms of my personal routine, but just the team has not met in total since the beginning of the pandemic. Only half of the team has seen we split the team in half. So half the team sees each other and the other half doesn't see their other colleagues.
Yeah, I was quite taken aback about a year ago. I was driving through downtown Niagara Falls and middle of the day, beautiful day, sunny, nice weather, and there wasn't a soul to be seen. Talk about zombie apocalypse. I made sure to take lots of photos and show someone in the future to remind them of what things could be like. I can see you're taking a sip from something. Are you a coffee drinker? What's your favorite drink?
Yeah, coffee. I'm a big espresso drinker, and actually, that was the other. If you talk about personal disruptions, so before the pandemic, I would have 14 shots of espresso a day, like a lot. I see your eyes are popping out. Yes, I'd have 14 shots of espresso. I do like 3 to 4 shots at a time from Starbucks. And the other thing is after the first month of the pandemic, I was feeling sick, except it wasn't obviously a result of the pandemic. I realized that I was going through caffeine withdrawal because I was drinking much less coffee than I usually drink. And so I've been able to scale back. I'm down to like about 6 or 7 shots a day. So I've taken the edge. I'm a pretty mellow. I feel like almost like a Californian now because I'm only doing 6 shots of espresso compared to the high intensity, high velocity Nik of the pre-pandemic world, where I was literally at Starbucks, every 2 hours getting a coffee.
It sounds like me and my undergraduate. I was in Ryerson and they had a Tim Hortons right across the street.
Yep.
And for a few years, they were the second busiest Tim Hortons in Canada because the business school would empty into the Tim Hortons every 45 minutes or so. And then it would just, they'd all come back and tall black coffee. I'd have 4 or 5 a day, or I should say extra large. But yeah, I've cut back a little bit as well.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of baking in the pandemic. I've noticed that for important business meetings, especially the very few that we have that are in person, when I bake something, they'll often forget who I am or what I want, but they'll never forget the cheesecake.
Yeah,
So,
that's pretty good. Actually, I've been making yogurt from scratch.
ooh.
Some of you might guess or not guess from my last name. It's not a great big long Nana Papadopoulos. It's just Nanos, but both my parents are Greek, and I'm a big yogurt guy. I've been making yogurt from scratch since the beginning of the pandemic. And my wife has teased me because I've made it into a science experiment where I've probably done 50 variations, same 3 ingredients like milk, yogurt, because you need yogurt for the culture. And I put a little bit of powdered skim milk in it to thicken it up because obviously being Greek, I'd like thick yogurt. I don't want runny yogurt. So, and I've done like 50 to 60 different variations of the yogurt recipe using just those 3 ingredients in the same proportions, but cooked and prepared differently, where I'm now pretty happy with what I've got. And so, but that's part of your baking. I'm making yogurt. So I've been making yogurt every week since the beginning of the pandemic as a bit of a hobby. And luckily my wife and I and the kids like yogurt. So we're all good.
It's music to my ears. I'm a lover of science, and it's one of the reasons I love baking. And it sounds very similar to my journey with cheesecake. I make a variation once a month. I change one thing, and either I keep it or I take a step back. And so it's always very good. And whenever I give it to anybody, I usually will attach a little request. I'll say, "Don't tell me it's good. I know it's good. Tell me how to make it better." I wouldn't give it to you if it wasn't good.
I thought you were going to say that you kind of judge whether people are cheesecake worthy. Are you worthy, or do they come over to the house and you bring the Costco cheesecake? Because it's like, these people don't know good cheesecake. If it landed on top of them, I'm not wasting my good stuff on them. And that's why it's kind of like, if someone, I'm sure it's the same with you. If someone says that I've given them yogurt, that's like code for they're a close friend of mine and that I like them, right? And then I'm sure it's the same thing with your cheesecake. If someone's been on the receiving end of the cheesecake, it's kind of like, this isn't anybody that's getting the cheesecake, because this is crafts. It's like a craft cheesecake, right?
It's actually, it's one of the few things that it's very difficult to sell. I've been asked to sell them, but the cost is too high. I'd have to sell it at a prohibitively high price, and it's not something that I feel like doing in mass. But I agree completely. If you really love, if it's made with love and you give it to somebody, you're saying something about that person. Now, what would you be doing if not data science and polling? I mean, your education lends one to be able to go in many different directions. And so, what would be an alternative universe that Nik Nanos lives in if he's not doing research and polling?
Oh, is this like Star Trek, the alternative universe, like Mirror Mirror, where there's an evil Nick with a goatee who wasn't yeah. Well, the evil Nick with the goatee would have been a lawyer, because in my family, so just think of it this way. I told everyone in my family I was going to be a lawyer when I was in high school. I was studying and preparing, wrote my LSAT when I was at Queen's, and was going to be a lawyer. And I ended up doing a project, a survey project. One of my dad's friends was a political candidate provincially, and he received a proposal to do a survey project. And he called me up. I came over to his house, and he kind of said, Nick, goes, here's a proposal I've received from a consultant to do a survey. It's $10,000. This is in the 1980s. He said, is this what I need? Is this a good price? And I half seriously, half joking said, hey, don't hire this consultant in Toronto. Hire me. I'll do a better job. And I laughed very nervously. He laughed, and then he said, are you serious? And I said, yeah, I think I could do it. And I did that project. And after I did that project, he said, so what are your plans for university? I said, well, I'm going to law school. And he said, I think you might be good. You did a really good job on this survey for us. I think you might be good. And he goes, I think you should try doing this for a living. And he said, you should start a company. He said, how much money do you have? I go, you know how much? I have $10,000. That's what you paid me for the project. And anyways, him and a number of other people invested in the firm, and we started off. But the toughest call was to my mother. So if you can imagine a Greek mother, right? I called her up and I said, "Oh, Mom, I'm not going to law school." I said, "I'm going to start a research company." And in my family, everyone's an entrepreneur. You own restaurants, real estate, convenience stores, food distribution businesses. They're all entrepreneurs of one ilk or another. And then I'm trying to explain to my mother what what I wanted to do. And I was having difficulty. And then of course I said, I'm going to be a consultant. And then my mother goes, you're going to be a consultant? What am I supposed to tell your uncles? Why can't you be like a teacher? Can't you? I thought you were going to be a lawyer, right? Why can't you work in a restaurant? Like a consultant? And then of course my mother goes, is there a girl? Tell me, is there a girl? And then it was like, are you having a drug problem? Like, tell me, or drinking? Like, what does it? She went through the whole thing. So, and, for the longest time, when I told my family that I was in effect a consultant, they were like, okay, that's just code for, we don't know what he's doing. And it's kind of dodgy and, he can't explain it. And, for them, they, there are certain types of traditional businesses. The advisory business was not, because in the businesses that they were running there, they really didn't need consultants, right? So there you go. I was a consultant, and but after a while, my family realized what I did, and I think they're very happy that I'm a consultant now because it's all worked out pretty well.
I couldn't agree more. I'll add a quick anecdote. When I was in solar energy about 11 years ago, back when the Ontario government still supported it, I had two options in front of me. One was to invest. I think I had like $45,000 saved up in the solar energy industry and in my business. And the other option, which one of my techie friends at the Shoppers Drug Mart IT department I used to work in was, harassing me about, was to buy these things called Bitcoins, which were 10 cents at the time. And of course, I didn't buy 450,000 Bitcoins. I don't have $27 billion in an account anywhere. But to any of our listeners, if you think you've made a bad choice in your life, remember there's worse, much, much, much worse. But yeah, this is great. Actually, I come from a Persian background, so I can understand your trials and tribulations with the family 100%. For us, it's doctor, lawyer, or professor. And
Yep.
Pretty much those are the three careers that make mom happy. So I feel your pain there, but hey, you've done fantastic. Now, regarding consulting skills, you're a CMC, certified management consultant. How has the skills that you've needed to become a CMC I'm assuming positively affected your data science and polling, reporting, or the crafting of your insights?
Yeah, well, they've actually been critical. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I value about the CMC designation period is this whole idea of online or ongoing learning. And, I think there's a trap that many people fall into just because they happen to be successful. And when I say successful, they make money, that they think that they're doing a good job and they think they're at the top of their game. But one of the things that really attracted me about the CMC is this whole idea of having a kind of like a family of practice that you can connect to with other professionals, right? And also the idea of constant learning. And it's one of those things where, think of it this way. I'm a math person, right? So as a math guy, I'm like a big believer in compound interest, and that small numbers yield to big payoffs and dividends. And the CMC is kind of like that. The reality is that if you are thinking about getting a CMC, or if you're in that space, you're probably generally good at what you do. But what the CMC designation does, and especially the learning, it allows you to further optimize how you're doing. That, maybe you're, preparing proposals, but it'll add a couple extra items into that process that make the proposals even stronger, that make them kind of world-class, so to speak, that shows that you can play in the big leagues. And I'd always kind of tell people, it's kind of interesting. I'd always kind of tell people my view on clients, that clients size up consultants, and then they say, oh, that consultant I can only trust with $10,000. This other consultant with 50,000, another consultant with 100,000, another consultant with maybe $1 million. And they size them up. And you know what? They size them up on all those little things which have to do with minimizing risk, right? Where people say, hey, you know what? The old thing, I hired IBM. How can I go wrong? I hired IBM. They're the best. They're world-class. So what the CMC does is put the CMC as a consultant on another level compared to the non-CMC consultant. Puts them on the level where, because they have a CMC, for those that know, they know that it means something. That also means that there's a certain quality that they could expect. They know that the project will be managed in a particular way, that the engagement will be properly defined, and that the likelihood of something going sideways is lower than a non-CMC. So I always think of it as risk. So from my perspective, we use what I've learned in the CMC and incorporated that into what we've done. And it's not been a revolution, it's just been an evolution to make it even better. But the CMC is, for me at least, is shorthand that, yeah, I'm really good at what I do, but as a consultant, I'm a world-class consultant. So don't think that it's going to be like a revolution. It's basically an evolution, but it puts you on another level from my perspective, because if you hire a CMC, there's less risk than in hiring a non-CMC.
That's music to my ears. In my master's program, the MBAs used to always make fun of me because almost every business case or presentation or report, my theme would be to mitigate risk and maximize value.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, but there's nothing wrong with that. Not that there's anything wrong with it. So building off of your last answer, I have been made aware of something interesting. I've only been a CMC for 3 or 4 years or so, and we're recognized in over 50 countries around the world. It's, I think, the only one that's international for consulting. But in certain nations, in certain countries, especially in Europe, you must be a CMC to call yourself a consultant. It's a protected term. And why do you think that's not the case in Canada? What's stopping Canadians from protecting the term? And what are the opposing forces?
Well, part of the opposing forces will be folks that don't have CMCs, right? The last thing that they want is for some sort of oversight, regulation, definition of stuff that would put them at a disadvantage. And the other thing is I think it's cultural. Canadians are not Canada as a country is not always first. But to your point, there's nothing to say that someday, and that the CMC will be a similar type of designation as we see in Europe. And I think that's where it really has to go. And it's always kind of one of those things where I don't know if I told you I have 4 boys, and one of the things that the Nanos brothers would say, whenever they'd want something, they keep asking for the same thing over and over again. They'd say, "Well, Dad, you only have to say yes once. Once you say yes once, that's it. It's forever." Getting the CMC designation recognized in Canada the way it is in Europe, it only has to happen once. Once we have it, it's forever. And the way I look at it, we have to build from the bottom up. We need clients to hold CMCs, right? For them to see that designation. We need suppliers to recognize the CMC as an advantage and something that mitigates risk. And that's why, I think, from the long term, we need a strategy so that, the CMC is recognized, even more recognized, but actually kind of part of that kind of protected status, so that we can build the profession. Because the fact of the matter is, what we're in the insight and intelligence business. It's the fastest growing and most important part of our economy. If we want to create prosperity, CMCs actually have to be in the forefront, because CMCs put intelligence and insight into the hands of decision makers in order for them to create jobs for Canada to be competitive. And so, my view is that, we just haven't gotten around to it, but I think it should be there should be a real long-term plan to have the CMC recognized at a whole new level than where it is now. And you know what? Where it is now is pretty good, but we have to be more ambitious than we have been in the past.
Yeah, sometimes I wish lobbying in Canada was as fruitful as it is in the US, but one can only hope. And I'm sure there's negative connotations to that as well, but at least from our point of view. So let's say I'm a young CMC. For the listeners who are listening, I'm no longer young, but let's say I am a young CMC and I'm not an employee of KPMG or Deloitte or, Price Waterhouse. How do I compete? How do I differentiate myself? How do I show a client that IBM is not your best alternative, that a CMC like myself is probably the better way to go?
Well, the thing is that the best way, well, I'll tell you how we did it, and then you can tell me whether it makes sense at all. At one point, I remember when we first started the firm, it wasn't really making very much money. Actually, it wasn't even making enough money to support me. And at one point, some of my friends who had graduated from university came up to Kingston, because I graduated from Queens, and the company was founded in Kingston, Ontario. And at that point, my friends came up, and I found out that it wasn't actually a social visit. It was an intervention for me, where they basically said, Nik, you're doing this consulting stuff. You got a polling company. You're a smart guy. Like, get a job. Go work in a company, get a job. All of them had jobs. And you know what? They were very happy with what they did. And they would say, do you actually think you're going to be like a national pollster? Do you actually think that you're going to compete against someone like Alan Gregg, who was like my hero? And I said, oh, I don't know, but I'm going to give it a try. But the thing is that here's what my strategy was. My strategy was very methodical. I knew that I could not immediately challenge a major player, but my first step was to be the leader in a smaller geography. And then once I was the leader in a smaller geography, then I partnered with other firms that were doing national stuff. And then I partnered with firms that doing international stuff. And then I kind of was at the top of the food chain, and then would be doing national and international work on my own. So, that was our strategy, because it was manageable and it was realistic. I think if you're just starting off as a CMC, you have to start to say, okay, what area can I own that is modest but realistic and can be attainable? And then as soon as you start to master that one area, then you want to start to kind of branch out and move up the food chain. I remember one of the projects I did at the very beginning. I was doing work for Business Depot, and they were suing Office Depot, and they had a whole bunch of experts, and I was the junior expert on the file. And I remember reading the resume of the person that was the senior expert on the file, and I was thinking, well, there's no way this guy's alive. He's got to be dead. Like he was doing his graduate degree with George Gallup in the University of Chicago in the 1930s. Like, how could this person be alive? And but the thing is, when you start working with larger firms and more seasoned experts, you learn from them. So maybe we should be thinking not just as a trade, but as a craft. And as a craft, you start off with small projects, and then you build out your expertise from there. And then you also kind of move up the food chain and do more sophisticated projects. But start by mastering a geography, right? Like if you live in a smaller, medium-sized community, start by being the top consultant in that community, and then branch out to the region. And then when you start to go to the national level, think of other firms that you might be able to partner with, so that you can learn how to do national projects and international projects, so that at some point you could do that on your own, and you basically build a narrative.
That's excellent advice. I'm very, very thankful for hearing that. I've been giving people, young professionals and recent graduates and current students, parallel advice, complementary but parallel. I've been telling them to find an industry that you love, carry out a full industry analysis, slowly become a subject matter expert, and that way you can consult in that industry far more easily and successfully. But I'd never considered the geography. That's excellent.
Yeah, but what you're proposing is the exact same model. Like, pick something narrow and manageable and master it. Then you can move out. You can move up the food chain and out from that.
So that leads me to my next question, and it's with regards to the next generation. On LinkedIn, I get maybe once a week, sometimes twice a week, I have young professionals, students, and recent graduates asking me about becoming a consultant. What path should they take? What skill sets do they need? How do they, we already mentioned how they compete, but these are the regular questions that I get. If you were to give these young professionals any advice, other than how to compete, which we just covered, what other advice would you give to them?
Well, get a CMC, because you know what? We talked about CMCs managing risk for clients. Well, actually, they also manage risks for employers. That if someone sees that someone has come out of business school or whatever, and that they've gone through the CMC program, or even that they're in the CMC program, it means that they're job ready. It means that they know how to do certain things. It means that they understand the ethics of doing business and the professionalism required to do business. And you don't have to teach them how to be a consultant. And, I think it can be a key differentiator for candidates that are applying. But I'll tell you, I don't see CMCs come by my desk for applications. I don't think I've ever seen a young CMC. I don't understand why. If I had known what I know now, I would have gotten my CMC like when I was still doing my first undergraduate degree, because that would have helped me in my business for a lot of things that I just basically had to learn through trial and error. Would have saved me a lot of time, and who knows, maybe shortened and accelerated the journey that I've been on. So get early, and then the thing is show that as a candidate, in the same way that if you're consulting on your own, you're minimizing risk. If someone was to hire you as an employee to basically be an internal consultant or internal expert, that they manage risks. They manage the risk if you happen to be a CMC.
That's a very good answer. I like that one. One of my clients, they were a startup in the bottling industry. And the very first thing I told them before we even agreed to any contract, I said, is get out of bottling. And they said, well, why is that? I said, I can't even imagine what the benefits are going to be when you look at the actual risks that you're looking at. There's Coke, Pepsi, and Cott. And they said, who's Cott? I said, exactly. And then there's you. They had millions of bottles already ordered, but they never got to sell a single one, unfortunately, because of the nature of their industry. They were dead in the water, as it were. So mitigating risk is something that actually drew me towards CMC. Their ethical code has drawn me in, and our own consulting firm actually started with the CMC ethical code and just made it more stringent adding things like we can't harm humanity, that we have to make sure that we're adding value to humanity before we add value to our stakeholders.
Yeah, and
Interesting.
that's actually a really good point. It's got to be CMC. If you really want to be a leader, it's got to be CMC plus. Not CMC is like the minimum. And the minimum, so it's kind of like going to school, right? You go to school, someone's a doctor, they go through medical school. You know that if they have the degree, that they've hit a particular minimum as a physician. It doesn't mean that they're this physician that you want to hire. So, if you go in to be a CMC, you shouldn't be thinking that's the destination. You should be saying that's the beginning of the journey. And what can you add on top of that in terms of the quality of the work, the values that you have, and how you can articulate that in order to kind of build on the CMC. And that's why I see the CMC as a foundational. It's basically a foundational designation, right? It's general, it's foundational, it's international. And you have to think of it in that way so that you can really build on top of that.
Now, a lot of the work that I do is labeled business planning. So including industry analyses and research, market analyses and research, opportunity spotting and validation, and valuation and marketing plans and operations plans and financial plans. So working with large sets of data, working with sometimes disparate information is something that I'm very much used to. But a lot of people aren't. And you're the expert, in my opinion. So Nanos research itself is very well established, very respected. It's very sought after. How do you take such vast amounts of data and information and turn it into something practical for your clients?
Well, one of the things we always try to do is distill it and walk in the shoes of the CEO. Many times we're briefing the CEO or the owner. That's all they're interested in many times is a decision that they need to make, and they need information and advice to help inform that decision. And the other thing is that, when you're in that position, you have to be humble in knowing that you're just one input of a number of inputs that a client might be having, that they're not going to just rely on one organization or company or one study to make a decision. They're going to be consulting a number of different sources. So, the thing is, one of the key things is to distill the research into something that's understandable and to distill it in a way that's actionable. You talked about the bottling example, right? It's kind of like go, no go, like, and why? And just so that folks can understand. So, I say the ability to distill, and I know for me, at least what clients tell me is that after I've given them a briefing, they know what to do. They're not confused, right? Or they know what the choices are that they have to make. And, many times, companies can't make the choices that they want to make because they might not be well funded enough. There might be regulatory issues that they're dealing with, or there might be cultural issues within the organization. So, as distilling all the data has to happen to a point where people have actionable information and that they understand what you've done. Because you know what? If you've done an engagement and no one understands what you've done and how you've done it and what it means, it's just not valuable to clients. So, it's more than just the mechanics. It's being able to distill something to its essence and then to have a discussion. And, the other thing is to talk about, very important from a data perspective, is to always talk about the limitations of your work, right? And, you talked about disparate data and data that might have gaps. Well, if you're a really good consultant and if you're top notch, you're going to say, this is my best advice based on the data that we have, but we don't have these other pieces of information which might be helpful, and to identify the limitations so that you properly represent the risk and so that clients can understand the risk when they're making a decision if the data is not complete or if there's other things that should be part of the equation.
Yeah, sometimes I feel sorry for old Rumsfeld in his speech about known knowns and unknown unknowns. The audience didn't get it, but those of us who
He was
did were
right.
like, yeah, he's totally right. He's just speaking to the wrong audience.
Yeah.
So you're busy. You got 4 boys. You're traveling. You're making television appearances almost weekly. How do you balance your work and your daily life? I mean, Is there a secret?
I'm pretty well organized. So, my dad was a very successful business person, and he kind of dropped debt. He retired when he was 46, because I remember him telling me, I've made enough money. You can imagine some Greek father going, yeah, I've worked really hard. I've made enough money. Now I want to take a break. When he was 46, when he was 47, he dropped dead of a heart attack. I think from the stress of not working. He never knew anything but working since he was like a kid, because he was young in the Second World War in Greece, right? So he knew how to fight, survive, and work. But so, the thing is the one thing that I learned about that is that you don't postpone time with your family. You don't postpone reaching out to a friend. You never postpone telling an employee or a colleague you're doing a good job. Never put anything like that off. And I tend to myself, so I'm an early riser, and because I want to spend, because during the regular daytime, I want to work and I want to spend time with my family. So I'm up early, and I exercise at like 5 o'clock every day, go to the office, try to get a little work done. And then, but you might be surprised to hear that we actually have a policy at Nanos where not for me, the policy doesn't apply to me. So maybe I'm a hypocrite, but for the analysts, work is from 8 to 4, not 7:30, not 7 o'clock, not 4:30 or 5 o'clock. We actually locked their laptops so that they can't work before 7:30 or past 4:30. I want to see people in the office kind of going out the door. And we tell people, here's the way it works. When you're at work, you're on 100%. You're focused on what you're doing. You're into what you're doing. You're not texting your friends. You're not on Facebook. You're not listening to music. You're not watching the news. You are doing work from 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock. And that when 4 o'clock comes, you're to go home, go to your family, go to your loved ones, go grocery shopping, make supper. And there's no expectation at all that anybody work past 4 o'clock or that they work on the weekend. And, it's kind of funny. My mother-in-law, she's not an entrepreneur. And, but I remember, she made one comment. She goes, anybody can work hard, but can you work smart? And you know what? She might have not have been a CMC, but she was 100% right. So, for us, it is about working smart. How can we do a greater volume of business in the same amount of time? How can we speed up our process without compromising quality? And how do we make sure that, everyone on the team knows, and, we also don't buy cell phones for any of our staff because we don't want them looking at emails from work. They're not allowed to respond. This might sound draconian, but people are not to respond to clients after 4 o'clock. We tell clients, sorry, we don't do meetings after 4. And you know what? Because I want to go home. I have 4 boys. I'm happily married. I want to go home. I want to go home and have like a big Greek coffee before supper and relax for 15 minutes. I like to cook, so sometimes I'm making supper. I keep checking my emails, but the fact of the matter is for the team. And I think that's one thing that was an idea that the team had that didn't come from me. I asked the team, what could make work better? And they said, could we finish work at 4 o'clock? And I said, sure, if you can get your work done at 4 o'clock, I don't mind you going home, because that's all we're interested in, is making sure that we can deliver on our mission. So having work-life balance is important. And, the thing is that it's also, I've always told people, manage your projects, everything will go well. It can wait till tomorrow, right? And so that's how we've kind of managed, and we've kind of had that culture of work hard from 8 to 4. Then after that, spend time with your family, have a hobby, do other stuff. No working on the weekend. But when you're at your desk, I'll tell you, when we're really busy and people are in the office, you don't hear anything. It's silent. People are just working. And then at 4 o'clock, it's like rush hour here, 4:01, and I'm like waving goodbye. You can see the window here. Well, you can't see the window, but I'm waving goodbye to people as they're going by my office at 4 o'clock. And I'm happy that they're leaving at 4 o'clock, and they're not embarrassed to leave at 4 o'clock.
It reminds me of one of my favorite books. It's one of the very few that I read that's in the category of Well, people have put it in the category of self-help. I don't. I look at it more like a manual, and that's How to Win Friends and Influence People by
All
Dale
right.
Carnegie. My grandmother in Iran was taught this in like the 30s, and so she recommended it to me. And at first I was shocked, and then I read it, and then we were taught it in Ryerson University as part of our entrepreneurship program. And the theme that they were pulling from that is dealing with people in general, good or bad, with you or against you. How do you deal with them? How do you get them to do what you want them to do and to be happy about doing it? And it looks like you've already done that very well. This leads us into a few very quick rapid fire questions. Just off the top of your head, paperback or digital?
Digital.
Online or television when it comes to media content?
Online. Sorry.
Do you prefer in-person consulting or virtual?
In person.
Sci-fi or comedy?
Sci-fi, 100%. Oh my man, I'm like watching. Oh, the other thing that I did during the pandemic, I watched every single. I'm a Star Trek buff. Every single Star Trek episode, from the original Star Trek to Discovery and Picard. Takes a year to watch every single episode from all of those every day. So that would be kind of my relaxation time. So say, for example, I do my workout and then I'd have yogurt and berries for breakfast. And I'm drinking a coffee for 30 minutes. I'd be watching Star Trek at 5:45 to 6:15.
Is Next Generation your favorite Star Trek?
Oh, that's like asking me to choose between the Nanos brothers, which one I love the most. Come on. I like, Deep Space Nine is pretty good. Next Generation is good. Actually, they're all pretty good for kind of in different ways. So
I'm a firm believer that there are only 3 Star Wars movies, and and no other Star Wars movies. I'm even seriously considering raising my kids in a temporal bubble. I'll introduce them to the 1986 Nintendo as if it's new. A couple of years later, give them the Super Nintendo, introduce them to Star Wars as if it's new, and see if they end up with the same likes and dislikes that I have.
That's good.
A mildly cruel social project, but it might be fun in the end.
Well, I don't think it'll be too scarring. I wouldn't worry about that.
I'm sure they'll recover. Although if they see the new Star Wars movies, they'll understand. So this has been enlightening. I really want to thank you for your time today. Do you have any questions for me? Let's turn the tables.
So what's next for the podcast?
Ooh, well, the podcast is really trying to get its foundation. Is it going to be strictly informative and engaging, or is there going to be an element of entertainment thrown in, like trivia questions? Are we going to focus more on the youth audience that wants to learn about consulting, or the potential clients that want to know more about the value of a CMC? So we're going to be spending the next 6 or 7 episodes trying different segments, getting feedback from people, and seeing what it is that we need to do in terms of tooling to get something that is in demand. As an entrepreneur myself, I like the pull strategy. Whatever the customer wants, that's what we're going to give them. I always kind of laugh when I hear a new restaurant opening and the chef says, I know what people want. And I'm thinking, nah, I don't think you do. They know what they want, and you're going to learn that the hard way. Maybe except Gordon Ramsay. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Him and Pierre White, Marco Pierre White. You can tell I love to cook as well. I'm a big lover of cooking and baking. So again, thank you very much for your time today. This has been enlightening. I'm going to wish every one of our members listening that if they have any questions for us, just shoot me an email. My email is going to be in the podcast description. And I thank you all for listening today.